Today I thought I'd record the weathering that I'm going to do for the electronic solar charge panel on Wally. So at this stage I've basically assembled the pieces. There's multiple pieces that make this up. I've printed that in resin. That also went in resin, probably didn't need to. The rest has just been an FDM print. I've done a very light sand on things, filled any gaps that are there already, and the first step that I'm going to do before I go too far will be going into putting down a primer layer. But before I go too far, I'll just kind of cover off some of the different pieces of equipment, paint, materials I'll be using. You'll see on the left I've got a bunch of reference photos either taken from video or from other builders to get an idea of the rust effect and where I want to have it. I've got some different airbrush paints over here, so a light kind of a yellow color, so yellow ochre, a burnt sienna paint, and a black airgun paint. I've got some PVA glue, well I think they call it Elmer's glue over in the States, or at least a brand of it is, and then some ground coffee grounds. So these are used coffee grounds that I use for a bit of texture to it, and we'll go through that a little bit later on. So that's just slightly watered down in terms of the glue there, and we use that to stick on the coffee grounds. Lastly, some old brushes for some dry brushing, and some makeup pads that you can use to get wet, damp, and kind of blotch out and blend in some areas as you're going through. So to kick things off, as I say, I've done a very light sand. The great thing about Wally is you don't have to be perfect. So normally I'd spend ages doing sanding and priming to try and get a really good finish. On Wally you don't, because if you look at the pictures, there's so many imperfections and rust, and we're going to be building up some of the layers on it, so we don't have to do that. So starting off, we'll come up with a prime. So in here I've got that in an airbrush. You could have that in a can if you want. I'm just using some cheap automotive spray putty in this case. I can kind of thin it down using some acetone. I have an HLV, high volume HVL, anyway, whatever it is, a airbrush that I use specifically for spray putty because it just gets covered in crap, and as much as I clean it up, it's always going to be crusty. So I keep one specifically for putty and nothing else. So we'll kick in. So we're going to do a few light coats. You can see the texture in there still. What you don't want to do is go in and go really heavy trying to fill up all the grooves. It just makes a sloppy mess. It takes ages to dry. You are much better off going multiple layers of like a thin, I can take that off, multiple thin layers, and then sand down. So typically for a run like this, what I'll do is around about 3 layers first before doing any kind of sanding whatsoever. So I've got a couple of touch-ups we'll do, and then we'll let it out to dry in the sun shortly, and we'll carry on. So I can see pieces here I'm going to have to do here, definitely some there. Not so worried about in here. This will probably come up okay once I do a couple of bits of sanding in there, but those are areas where I may have to look at filling. But what I may do in this case is, because I'm going to do that built-up rust effect, I might use the glue and coffee grounds in that area to fill it in. So anywhere you got these imperfections, you can use that to your advantage. Obviously, if you want to go screen accurate and have it exactly where the rust is on Wally in the movies, then you do have to make sure you've got a pretty good surface to start with, and then create the rust effect on top. Right, I'm going to do some sanding. In this case I'll get a new piece of sandpaper. This sandpaper is effectively a can be used wet or dry. It's a 220 grit. For something like this would be something I'd use to knock down the lines. I generally don't go much lower than that, otherwise I start gouging into the plastic. This has been printed in PETG rather than a PLA, just so it's a little bit more forgiving with the sanding, and also handles temperatures and outdoors a bit better. So if I'm out showing somewhere, then when you're priming and you're painting, just take it easy. If your paint's still drying, you can take to it with a nice light sand. You don't have to go hardcore straight away. So that's looking pretty good already. And we're going to use those to our advantage. See, now this is more of a line I want to fix. So we've got two options. We can sand that down or we can fill it, and in this case we're going to fill it. This is an acrylic putty. I should use gloves, but for the purpose of this, I'm just going to use a tiny amount. You don't want to use this stuff in a thick, like you're not filling holes with this. These are just minor imperfections that you just want to smooth out. It's not like a builder's bog where you can build up layer upon layer of might as well use some over here. Again, it's a glazing putty. The idea is to be really thin layers. So I'd say probably a ratio maybe 2 to 1, 2 glue to 1 water. So I just want to thin it out just a little bit. If it's already runny, then you don't need to thin it even further. And now we're just going to start putting it into the places where we want there to be a rust effect. We want to build up kind of that textured layer. And as I say, I'm going to use the areas where I have imperfection showing already. I don't want to go too thick. Enough to kind of fill in those. That's probably a bit too thick there. So we're going to get right to these corners. Again, we use that glue just to fill it, but don't worry if you kind of go out into a few extra places you weren't planning to. These are the places we want the. So we want a little bit around, here. We want these corner pieces. Okay, so we've probably got enough there to start with. So now we're going to take our used coffee grounds and we're just going to sprinkle over everywhere we've got that PVA glue. Just trying to, don't want it to all clump up on one ear or anything like that. This is just going to add a little bit of texture. We're going to blow off excess in a moment. You're not going to see this coffee ground color at all. It's all going to be painted over the top of. This is all going to be texture under the paint. So there's a little bit there. We're going to now add it to the top. I'm going to have quite a lot of texture on here. I don't want to go too far forward because we are going to have those bumper parts over the top. And we're even going to put on a little bit of texture on the buttons. Just make sure we don't block any of the where the light goes through. All right. And the great thing about this is using coffee grounds is you get to drink the coffee beforehand. Trying to just wrinkle it, rustle it between your fingers. You don't want big clumps or anything. Just light blow. And we go right where else do I need to put it, and we can see, probably want to put a bit more around here. A little bit around here. And we need a really light dusting over on these pieces here because we want this whole thing to have some level of texture. And we're going to keep building up in here. So we've already got coffee ground in, so we can put in a little bit more on top, and that'll help fill in that gaps. So we don't have to use the sandpaper to make everything smooth in the first instance. Because again, we're trying to build texture up. Multiple layers. Okay, so now the glue has dried, or it's dried sufficiently for the next layer. There's no major damp spots there, so I'm good for that. I'm going to proceed with a Rust-Oleum dark steel. So this is going to go straight over the top, nothing else. Again, so about 12-16 inches away, 30 centimeters ish, somewhere around there. Good shake beforehand. Going to paint it from the different angles. Just making sure you're getting all the angles. Looking good. And you already see you're starting to get this textured look. And we can push in some of the dark pigments into those areas. So we're going to wait for this to set and dry before we come back with the next techniques. But that's looking good. Now it's time to start adding some colour. So I'm just going to grab an old brush here, dab it on. Don't want to have it too dark. And I want to pick on the areas where it's most likely going to be dark. And And it's just dabbing. It's not brushing. Again, focusing on the areas where it's going to most likely have some darkness. So in between here and those corners. Just a little bit on the corner here. Again, we're going to build this up over time, so it's not like one and done. It's very much a add some, and then add another color, then add another color again. You'll see where it naturally starts to look like it's going to have the areas of darker and lighter. You want it to be quite natural. So I'm going to have like a dark area here. And again, another one here. Again, these are just airbrush paints. It's just an acrylic. There's a bit heavy there, that's right, we can thin it out. Okay, round one. So next, we're going to move to the burnt sienna. Doesn't matter what brand. Looking for that kind of brownish look, bit of a rust colour. And again, we're just trying to get in. Now we will be going with this with an airbrush later on. So it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just looking from different angles to see. Now you see it's quite reflective at the moment. That'll be knocked down when we airbrush over the top. And we'll be airbrushing with a mixture of colours, but mostly that brown, that dark sienna colour. So it's already starting to get a bit of a rusty look, which is good. Now, these are the colours that come up underneath the airbrush. So you might go, that doesn't look like rust just yet, but you'll start to understand as it, and see as it goes through the process. Remember, I don't have to do that bit there. I'm going to make it look natural, not like it's just been brushed on. And so we're kind of stifling it in, bit of a mix. Some of those have been a little bit too wet. You should dry it off a little bit before putting it on. And just add more. And we've got that yellow there for some highlights, so soon we'll start adding some yellow as well. A little bit more brown down here. Okay, and that's a bit more than I wanted, so I'll use this to knock off some of the extra, and if it's a bit wet, I can use that to knock it out, and it helps blend it in. So that's quite good on top. So next we'll do a little bit of yellow. We don't need too much of this yellow. It's really just a highlight. Just looking for places to add a highlight to, just so it's not all the same. Alright, went a bit too far again there, so just dab into it in. Helping blend those colours. Cool. I'm going to add some more dark again, because when we go back with the airbrush, again it's going to create a layered effect. So if I know the next one's going to be like a dark colour, knocking down any of the ones which just look a little bit darker than I want. Okay, now we get to the airbrushing piece. Don't want to put too much because we can always put more in. It's harder to take extra off. So again, we're going to go back and look at, like for that one for me, that's a little bit too grey. That's the Disney one, so that's pretty reasonable. There's another one there. So those are going to give us ideas of what we're trying to look to knock it back to. So we're just going lightly in with the airbrush. So I'm trying to knock some of the silver out. Creating kind of runs. So we've already run out, so we're going to put some more in. All right, got a little bit in there. Right. I used to be terrible with cleaning out the airbrush and leaving paint in it. It's just not worth it. You'll be pulling the thing apart. I don't know if this is the proper way of doing it. I don't profess to be an expert at it. It's just stuff I've been learning over the last couple of years. So in this case I'm just using some isopropyl alcohol. Just giving it a good clean. Little squirt in there. And then just clean it out. There we go. Now you can hear it sucking air. Again, a few drops. Now this is just really highlights. So we've knocked the colour down with the brown, take some of the silver shine off. So I'm just kind of running the lines now. Just to help me emphasize. Almost like cartoon feel. Again from the single. We can just wipe that back. Keep going down after that bit. It's feeling pretty good. Make sure it blends around in the corner as well. Right, that's pretty much empty. All right. Right, lucky last. So again, this is yellow ochre. Only a few drops, because again, we're just going to do some highlights. Just take it from like a 2-tone to a 3-tone. There we go. Just wanted to make sure we didn't have black coming out still. So we hit. Right. Lucky last, we're going to go back to these buttons here. In this case, I'll just actually drop in a mix. I suppose I can. To make sure that you don't end up with like one shiny side and everything else is looking rusty. And that is done.